Lee Hyun woke up with his head pounding like someone had hit him with a metal bar. The floor beneath him felt cold and smooth like glass, but it moved slightly like it was breathing. He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy and strange. Everything around him glowed with the soft blue light that hurt his eyes. The walls were not made of metal or stone like he expected. They looked alive somehow, with thin lines running through them like blood vessels. The lines pulsed with the same blue light over and over again. The air tasted wrong too. It was thick and metallic, like he was breathing copper coins. Hyun remembered being on his ship just hours ago. He was Captain Lee Hyun of the Earth Defense Corps, and he had been leading a small team to check out some strange signals near Jupiter. Then everything went white and he woke up here in this horrible place. He looked around and saw other beings locked up like him. There was a tall, thin creature with skin like purple rubber. Next to it sat something that looked like a walking tree with too many arms. In another cell, he could see a being covered in silver fur with huge black eyes that seemed to hold great sadness. None of them looked human. None of them looked like they came from Earth. This meant he was very far from home and in serious trouble. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Hyun pressed himself against the back wall as several large figures approached. They walked on two legs like humans, but that was where the similarity ended. These beings were covered in dark green scales that reflected the blue light. Their heads were long and narrow like snakes, but with 4 eyes arranged in a square pattern. When they opened their mouths, Hyun could see rows of sharp teeth. The largest one stopped in front of his cell. It wore some kind of uniform with strange symbols on the chest. When it spoke, its voice sounded like gravel being crushed. "The human is awake," it said in perfect English, though its mouth barely moved. "Good. Commander Wrath wants to see this one before the games begin." Games. That word made Hyun's stomach turn cold with fear. He had heard stories from other space missions about alien races that captured other beings for entertainment. He had always hoped those stories were just rumors meant to scare new recruits. 2 of the scaled beings opened his cell and grabbed his arms. Their grip was incredibly strong, and their claws dug slightly into his skin. They dragged him down a long corridor that curved gently to the left. The walls here were covered in the same living material with more of those pulsing blue lines. They brought him to a large room with a high ceiling. In the center sat the biggest of the scaled beings Hyun had seen yet. This one wore a cape made of what looked like black metal mesh and had golden bands around its neck and wrists. Its 4 eyes focused on Hyun with cold interest. "I am Commander Wrath Zeron of the Valeth Imperial Fleet," the creature said. Its voice was deeper than the others and carried the weight of absolute authority. "You are now property of the Valeth Empire. Your world has been cataloged and marked for future harvesting. Earth." They were talking about taking over Earth. Hyun felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry would not help him or his homeworld right now. "What do you want with me?" Hyun asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Commander Wrath made a sound that might have been laughter. "Want? We want nothing from you, human. You are here for our entertainment. Tomorrow begins the Harvest Festival, and our people demand blood sport for their amusement." Blood sport. The words hit Hyun like a physical blow. He was going to be forced to fight for the entertainment of these creatures. Probably to the death. "The Corvan dragons have not fed on fresh prey for many cycles," Commander Wrath continued. "They grow restless in their pens. Your arrival is most convenient timing. Dragons. Real dragons." Hyun had studied mythology and folklore during his time at the military academy. Every human culture had stories about dragons, but they were just stories. Legends. Things that never really existed. "Our dragons are magnificent beasts," another Valeth said, stepping forward. This one was smaller than the commander and wore different symbols on its uniform. They were bred over thousands of years to be the perfect gladiatorial opponents. Intelligent enough to make the hunt interesting, but savage enough to guarantee a spectacular death for our audiences. The way they talked about murder as entertainment made Hyun sick. These beings saw other lives as nothing more than toys to be broken for fun. He thought about his crew back on Earth and hoped they had managed to send a warning about these Valeth before his ship was taken. Commander Wrath stood up from his chair and walked closer to Hyun. The alien was nearly 8 feet tall, and its presence was intimidating. "Tell me, human, what do your people do with lower creatures for entertainment?" Hyun thought carefully about his answer. "We have sports and games. Competitions between willing participants. Sometimes we have shows with trained animals, but we do not force beings to fight to the death." "How boring," Commander Wrath said with obvious disgust. Your species lacks proper appreciation for true entertainment. This explains why you remain confined to a single star system while we rule across 3. The commander turned to the other Valeth in the room. Prepare the human with the others. The arena will be cleaned and the dragons readied. I want the best viewing angles recorded for the Imperial Archives. As they dragged him back toward the holding area, Hyun tried to process everything he had learned. He was trapped on an alien ship with no way to contact Earth. Tomorrow he would be thrown into an arena to fight creatures called dragons for the entertainment of sadistic aliens. His chances of survival seemed almost zero, but Lee Hyun had not survived military training and 3 deep space missions by giving up easily. If these Valeth wanted a show, he would give them one they would never forget. He just had to figure out how to stay alive long enough to find a way home. The blue lights continued to pulse in the walls around him as they locked him back in his cell. In a few hours, the sun would rise on whatever world this ship was orbiting, and his fight for survival would begin. He closed his eyes and tried to rest, but sleep would not come. Tomorrow would bring dragons and death, but tonight he still had time to think and plan. Somewhere in this ship there had to be a weakness he could exploit. The other prisoners watched him with curious eyes, as if they could sense something different about the human. Maybe they could see the determination in his face, or maybe they just recognized a fellow fighter when they saw one. Whatever happened tomorrow, Lee Hyun would not die quietly. The next morning came too quickly for Lee Hyun. Harsh lights flooded his cell and the sound of marching feet echoed through the corridors. The Valeth guards arrived, in full armor this time, with weapons that hummed with deadly energy. Time for the show, human, one of them said with what sounded like excitement in its voice. They pulled Hyun from his cell along with 5 other prisoners, the tall purple being walked beside him with surprising dignity, despite the chains around its wrists. The tree-like creature moved slowly, but its many arms never stopped moving in patterns that looked almost like sign language. The silver-furred being with the sad black eyes kept looking at Hyun as if it wanted to say something important. They were led through more curved corridors until they reached a massive preparation chamber. The room was filled with weapons and armor, but none of it looked like anything Hyun recognized from Earth. Everything had that same organic quality as the walls, with surfaces that seemed to shift and breathe. A small Valeth wearing different, colored scales approached them. This one moved differently than the others, less aggressive and more careful. It began sorting through the equipment while occasionally glancing at monitoring devices built into the walls. I am Park Ji-won, the small Valeth said quietly. I monitor the arena systems to ensure proper function during the games. Hyun noticed that Park Ji-won spoke more softly than the other Valeth and seemed uncomfortable with what was happening. There might be hope in finding an ally among his captors after all. The dragons are acting strange today, Park Ji-won continued while fitting Hyun with a basic chest plate made of some lightweight metal. Their behavior readings are unlike anything in our records. Strange how? Hyun asked. Park Ji-won looked around to make sure no guards were listening. They are quiet. Dragons are never quiet before feeding time. They should be roaring and thrashing in their pens, but instead they sit in complete silence. Their biosigns show stress, but not from hunger. This information made Hyun think. If the dragons were acting differently than expected, maybe the situation was not as hopeless as it seemed. Animals often sensed things that others could not. Perhaps these dragons sensed something about today that even their captors did not understand. Park Ji-won handed him a weapon that looked like a sword, but glowed with blue energy along its edge. This is a plasma blade. It will cut through dragon scales if you can get close enough to use it. Most prisoners never get the chance. The weight of the weapon felt strange in Hyun's hands, but his military training helped him adjust quickly. He had trained with many different types of weapons, and this was just one more tool to master. Through a large window, Hyun could see the arena for the first time. It was enormous, stretching for kilometers in every direction. The floor was covered in sand that had been stained dark red from previous games. Thousands of Valeth filled the viewing areas, their excited chittering and clicking, creating a wall of sound. The arena walls were carved from solid rock, but Hyun noticed something the others had missed. There were symbols carved into the stone near the base of the walls. They were worn smooth by age and weather, but he could still make out their basic shapes. They looked familiar somehow, like something he had seen before in his archaeological studies back on Earth. The arena was built on the ruins of an ancient structure, Park Ji-won said, following his gaze. No one remembers what it used to be. The site was chosen because the rock formation made construction easier. Ancient ruins. That might be important later if he lived long enough to investigate. Yoon memorized the location of the symbols and tried to think of where he might have seen similar markings before. A loud rumbling sound came from beneath the arena floor. The sand began to shift and move as hidden mechanisms activated. 3 massive gates started to rise along the far wall, each one large enough for a building to pass through. The dragon pens, Park Ji-won whispered. 3 adult Corvan dragons. Each one has killed dozens of prisoners over the years. The crowd noise grew louder as the gates opened fully, but instead of the expected roars and screams of hungry beasts, there was only silence. The dragons were not making any sound at all. Then Hyun saw them and his breath caught in his throat. They were magnificent and terrible at the same time. Each dragon was the size of an earth elephant but built like a predator. Their scales shimmered like living metal, reflecting the arena lights in brilliant patterns. Their eyes burned with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. But they were not charging forward to attack the prisoners as everyone expected. Instead, they stood perfectly still at the entrance to their pens. Their great heads turned slowly to scan the arena floor until all 3 sets of eyes focused directly on Lee Hyun. The crowd fell silent. Even the guards stopped moving. In all the years the arena had operated, the dragons had never hesitated to attack fresh prey. They had been bred and trained to kill on sight, but now they just stood there staring at the human. Commander Rath's voice boomed across the arena from his viewing box. "Release the prisoners. Begin the games." The floor beneath their feet began to rise, carrying them up into the arena proper. Hyun felt the hot sand beneath his boots and the weight of thousands of alien eyes watching his every move. The other prisoners spread out around the arena floor, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the dragons. But the dragons were not interested in the other prisoners. They began moving forward slowly and deliberately. Their massive feet made no sound on the sand as they approached. Hyun gripped his plasma blade tighter and prepared to fight for his life. Then something impossible happened. The largest dragon, the one with scars covering its metallic scales, stopped directly in front of Hyun. It lowered its enormous head until it was level with his chest. The gesture looked almost like a bow. The arena fell into complete silence. Even Commander Rath seemed too shocked to speak. Hyun stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The dragon's eyes met his, and he saw something there that changed everything he thought he knew about this situation. These creatures were not mindless beasts. They were intelligent beings, and for some reason they recognized him. Lee Hyun stared into the dragon's eyes and felt something stirred deep in his mind. It was like hearing a song from childhood that he had forgotten, but his body remembered. The dragon's gaze held intelligence and something else that made his heart race. Recognition. The silence in the arena stretched on and on. Commander Rath's voice finally cut through the quiet with obvious anger and confusion. "What are they waiting for? Attack the prisoners. Begin the bloodshed." But the dragons ignored their master's commands. The largest one, with battle scars covering its metallic blue scales, remained bowed before Hyun. The other 2 moved closer, but they showed no signs of aggression. Their movements were careful and respectful, like they were approaching something sacred. Hyun slowly reached out his hand toward the scarred dragon's snout. Every instinct told him this was a terrible idea, but something deeper than instinct guided his actions. His fingers touched the warm metal-like scales, and the dragon's eyes closed as if in relief. In the monitoring station above the arena, Park Ji-won watched his instruments with growing amazement. The bio-readings from all 3 dragons showed patterns he had never seen before. Their brain activity was increasing rapidly, and their stress levels were dropping to almost 0. Most importantly, they were communicating with each other through low-frequency sounds that the arena's sensors could barely detect. "This is impossible," Park Ji-won whispered to himself. Dragons do not have complex communication abilities, but his instruments did not lie. The creatures were sharing information at a level that suggested true intelligence rather than simple animal cunning. He began accessing deeper historical records about the dragons, trying to understand what was happening. The crowd grew restless as the expected violence failed to begin. Some aliens began calling for action while others watched in fascination. This was unlike anything that had ever happened in the arena's long history of blood sport. Commander Rath's crest flared bright red with rage. "Activate the pain stimulators. Force them to attack." Energy weapons built into the arena walls began charging, but before they could fire, something extraordinary happened. The ancient symbols carved into the arena walls began to glow with a soft golden light. The glow spread along hidden lines in the rock, creating patterns that had been invisible for thousands of years. Park Ji-won's equipment went wild as systems he did not even know existed came online throughout the arena. The readings showed massive amounts of stored energy activating in response to some kind of genetic signature, a genetic signature that matched the human standing with the dragons. Deep in the ship's historical archives, Park Ji-won found records that had been sealed for centuries. The dragons had not been captured in Valith space at all. They had been found on a dead world in a distant system that the Valith had catalogued as uninhabited. The world's designation was simply Sector 7 Alpha, but there were older records that called it by a different name, Sol 3, the third planet in the Sol system, Earth. The revelation hit Park Ji-won like a physical blow. These dragons were not native to any world the Valith had conquered. They had come from the humans' home system thousands of years ago. But how was that possible when humans had only recently achieved spaceflight? The largest dragon, which Park Ji-won now realized was named Kim Miran, according to the ancient records, pressed her head more firmly against Hyun's hand. Suddenly images began flooding his mind. Not his own memories, but genetic memories passed down through generations of dragons. He saw laboratories filled with human scientists working desperately to preserve something precious. He saw massive ships leaving a dying world, carrying the last hopes of a civilization. He saw colonists arriving on a new planet with creatures that looked like the dragons, but smaller and less developed. The memories were fragmented and unclear, but the message was unmistakable. Long ago, humans had reached the stars carrying with them genetically enhanced guardian creatures. These dragons were the descendants of those guardians, and they remembered their purpose. Even after thousands of years of captivity, Kim Miran opened her eyes and looked directly at Hyun. When she spoke, it was not with words, but with thoughts that appeared directly in his mind. "We have waited so long, young guardian. The songs of our mothers told us that one day the children of Earth would return to wake us from our long sleep." Hyun nearly dropped his weapon in shock. The dragon was not only intelligent, but she could communicate telepathically. More than that, she called him guardian as if he held some important position he did not understand. "I do not understand," he thought back to her. "I am just a soldier trying to get home." "You carry the blood of those who made us," Kim Miran replied. "The genetic markers are clear. You are descended from the scientists who gave us purpose, and the colonists who raised us as partners rather than beasts." The other two dragons moved closer, and also pressed their heads against Hyun's hands. Immediately, their eyes began to glow with the same golden light that was spreading through the arena walls. The mental connection expanded to include all three creatures, and their combined memories painted a clearer picture of the past. Thousands of years ago, Earth had faced its first great extinction event. A group of brilliant scientists had developed technology to enhance certain species, creating perfect symbiotic relationships between humans and their animal partners. When they reached the stars, these enhanced creatures had served as guardians and companions. But plague had struck the colony world of Corvin Prime. The human colonists had died, but not before, uploading their consciousness into the planetary computer network. The dragons had survived, but over the centuries they had been captured by the Valith, who saw them only as exotic beasts for their arena. "The slavers bred us for violence," Kim Miran explained. "They suppressed our intelligence and made us forget our true nature. But the genetic memories remained hidden, waiting for the right trigger to awaken them." Commander Rath's voice echoed through the arena, filled with desperate authority. "Enough of this madness. All units activate emergency protocols. Destroy the human and reset the dragons to baseline aggression." The arena's defensive systems came online, and energy barriers rose around the sand floor. Automated weapons emerged from hidden panels in the walls, all targeting Hyun and the dragons. But as they prepared to fire, the golden glow from the ancient symbols intensified, and something remarkable happened. Systems throughout the Valith ship began responding to signals from the arena. The dragon's awakening was triggering responses in technology that had been dormant for millennia. Technology that recognized the authority of their original human creators. Kim Miran raised her head and let out a sound that was part roar and part song. The call echoed through the ship's corridors, reaching other dragons held in stasis chambers throughout the vessel. One by one, they began to wake, up and remember what they truly were. The Valeth had built their empire on the backs of enslaved dragons, but they had never realized that their most powerful weapons were actually the guardians of another species. Now those guardians were remembering their oath, and their true masters had returned. Hyun stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by awakening dragons, as the very foundations of the Valeth Empire began to crumble around him. The ship shuddered as more dragons throughout the vessel began to wake from their forced slumber. Kim Miran's call had reached every corner of the massive Valeth warship, and her kin were responding. In holding bays scattered across dozens of levels, creatures that had been kept in stasis for years began to stir. Lee Hyun felt the change through his connection with the 3 arena dragons. Each new awakening sent waves of shared memory and emotion through the growing network of conscious minds. The dragons were not just individual creatures, but part of a larger collective intelligence that had been broken apart by centuries of captivity. Park Ji-won watched his monitoring systems with growing alarm as power fluctuations spread throughout the ship. The biomechanical systems that the Valeth used for everything from life support to navigation were beginning to malfunction. But as he studied the readings more closely, he realized the systems were not breaking down. They were being overridden by something with greater authority. The ship's core systems are responding to external commands, he reported to Commander Rath through the communication array. Something is accessing our primary control networks. Impossible, Commander Rath snarled from his viewing box above the arena. Our biosystems are hardwired against foreign intrusion. Nothing can override Valeth genetic locks. But Park Ji-won's instruments told a different story. The ship itself was built using technology taken from conquered worlds, including components salvaged from the dead planet where the dragons had been found. Technology that was now recognizing the genetic signature of its original creators and responding accordingly. In the arena, Hyun placed his hands on the heads of all 3 dragons and felt their individual consciousness merge with his own. The experience was overwhelming at first, but gradually he began to understand the vast network of memory and knowledge they shared. Through Kim Miran's ancient memories, he saw the final days of the human colony on Corvin Prime. Scientists working desperately to preserve their species' legacy as a deadly plague spread through their settlements. He watched as they uploaded their consciousness into quantum storage networks built into the planet's crust, while their dragon guardians stood watch over the process. We were meant to carry on your work, Kim Miran explained through their mental link, to preserve human knowledge and values until your people could return to claim it. But the Valeth found us before we could complete our mission. The other dragons in the arena moved closer, forming a protective circle around Hyun. Their scales began to shimmer with patterns of light that pulsed in rhythm with the awakening systems throughout the ship. They were communicating with their scattered kin using frequencies that penetrated the ship's hull and reached dragons on other Valeth vessels in the fleet. Commander Rath activated the arena's emergency protocols, trying to regain control of the situation. Energy weapons descended from the ceiling and aimed at the group in the center of the sand floor. But before they could fire, the weapons simply shut down. The ship's targeting systems refused to lock onto the human or his dragon guardians. All security teams to the arena level, Rath commanded over the ship's communication system. Eliminate the human and sedate the dragons immediately. Armored Valeth soldiers began pouring into the arena through access tunnels, but they found their weapons would not function properly. The energy cells that powered their equipment were draining rapidly, and their targeting systems showed only static. The ship was actively working against them. Hyun felt a new presence touch his mind as another dragon somewhere in the ship's depths fully awakened. This one was older than Kim Miran and carried memories that stretched back even further into Earth's history. Through this ancient consciousness, he saw the truth about humanity's first journey to the stars. Earth had not sent out just one colony ship, but dozens of them. Each carried different groups of enhanced guardian species along with human settlers. The dragons were just one type of guardian, created through advanced genetic engineering to serve as partners and protectors for human colonies. There are others, the ancient dragon shared, guardians of air and sea and space itself, all carrying the genetic codes that make us complete when joined with human consciousness. This revelation staggered Hyun. Humanity had spread across the galaxy thousands of years ago, creating a network of colonies protected by engineered guardian species. But something had gone wrong, and the colonies had been lost or destroyed, leaving their guardians scattered and enslaved by other species. Park Ji-won's equipment detected massive energy buildups in the ship's power cores. The awakening dragons were not just accessing individual systems, but connecting to the fundamental quantum networks that powered Valeth technology. Networks that had been built using salvaged equipment from human colonies. "The dragons are taking control of everything," he reported with growing panic in his voice. "They have root access to systems I did not even know existed." Throughout the ship, other alien prisoners began to notice changes. Cell doors that had been sealed for years began to open on their own. Guard stations lost power while prisoner areas gained additional life support. The ship was actively working to free everyone the Valeth had enslaved. But the dragons were not simply causing chaos. Their actions were coordinated and purposeful. They were liberating prisoners while simultaneously protecting them from Valeth retaliation. Security systems that would normally respond to a prison break remained inactive while emergency supplies were redirected to areas where freed captives needed them. Kim Mirren shared one final memory with Hyun that changed his understanding of everything. He saw the moment when the last human scientist on Corvin Prime had died from the plague. With her final breath, she had spoken a command that locked the dragon's full potential behind genetic barriers that could only be opened by her descendants. "You are the key that unlocks what we were meant to be," Kim Mirren explained. "But we are the tools that can reshape the galaxy. Together we can restore what was lost and build something greater than either of our species could create alone." The implications were staggering. Hyun was not just a random prisoner who had stumbled onto something important. He was the genetic heir to an ancient human civilization that had seeded the galaxy with guardian species. His presence was awakening potential that had been dormant for thousands of years. Around him, the three arena dragons began to glow more brightly as more of their scattered kin joined the growing network. Their shared consciousness was becoming something new and powerful that combined the best aspects of human creativity with draconic wisdom and strength. Commander Wrath's voice echoed through the arena, one last time filled with desperate fury. "If I cannot control the dragons, then I will destroy them all. Activate the ship's self-destruct sequence." But even as he spoke, the command interfaces on the bridge were shutting down one by one. The ship would no longer obey orders that would harm the awakening guardians or their human partner. The Valeth Empire was built on enslaved dragons, but those same dragons were now free, and they remembered their true loyalty. The revolution had begun, and it would spread far beyond this single ship. The Valeth command ship drifted dead in space as its biological systems shut down one by one. Emergency power kept basic life support running, but everything else had gone dark. In the corridors, dragons moved freely for the first time in generations while their former captors huddled in sealed compartments. Park Ji-won had made his choice. The young technician moved through the ship's maintenance tunnels, helping to free the remaining prisoners from their cells. He carried override codes and knowledge of the ship's layout that proved invaluable to the dragon's peaceful revolution. "Why are you helping us?" asked Kes the crystal being as Ji-won opened her cell door. "We are enemies of your people." Ji-won's scales changed color slightly, showing embarrassment and determination. "You are not enemies. You are prisoners. My people have done terrible things in the name of entertainment and glory. Someone has to make it right." The other alien prisoners were amazed by what they witnessed. Instead of the mindless slaughter they expected, the dragons were conducting the most civilized rebellion in galactic history. They disabled weapons without killing guards. They freed captives while providing them with food and medical care. Most remarkably, they showed mercy even to their former tormentors. Commander Wrath had barricaded himself on the bridge with his most loyal officers. They monitored the ship's systems and watched their empire crumble through security feeds. Dragons throughout the Valeth fleet were awakening as news of the liberation spread through some kind of telepathic network. "Sir, we are receiving distress calls from 17 vessels," reported one officer. "The dragons are taking control of ship systems across the entire sector." Commander Wrath slammed his fist against his command chair. "How is this possible? The neural dampeners were supposed to keep them docile forever." What the Valeth had never understood was that their technology could only suppress dragon intelligence, not destroy it. The memories and knowledge had been locked away but never erased. All it took was the right genetic key to unlock what had always been there. In the arena, Hyun walked among dozens of dragons, learning their names and stories. Each one was an individual with their own personality and dreams. Kim Miran was a natural leader, wise and patient. Jin Wook had an artistic soul and created beautiful sculptures from melted metal. Lee Sora was a teacher who loved sharing knowledge with others. They were not monsters or weapons. They were people who had been forced to pretend otherwise for so long they had almost forgotten who they really were. "What do you want to do now?" Hyun asked Kim Miran as they stood together watching the other dragons explore their newfound freedom. The great black dragon's eyes glowed with gentle fire. "We want to go home to Corvin Prime. We want to rebuild what was destroyed and create something beautiful again. But first we must free the others." Throughout known space, hundreds of dragons were held captive on Valeth vessels. Each ship that received word of the awakening saw its dragon slaves remember their true nature. Some ships managed to escape and return to Valeth space. Others, like this command vessel, found themselves under new management. The rebellion spread beyond the dragons themselves. Other enslaved species saw that freedom was possible and began their own uprisings. The Valeth Empire had been built on the assumption that superior force could control any situation. They had never considered what would happen if their victims stopped believing in their own helplessness. Lee Na-young was the ship's chief biosystems engineer, and she had been watching the cascade failures with growing understanding. The ship's living components were not just shutting down randomly. They were making choices. The biological parts of Valeth technology had achieved a form of consciousness, and they were choosing to side with the dragons. This was impossible according to everything she knew about bioengineering. Living machines were supposed to be programmed responses, not thinking beings, but the evidence was undeniable. The ship itself was joining the rebellion. Na-young made her way to the arena, avoiding the corridors where dragons moved freely. She was not afraid of the creatures themselves, but of what their awakening meant for her people. If the Valeth could not control their own technology, then their civilization was doomed. She found Hyun talking with a group of recently freed prisoners from a dozen different species. The human looked tired but determined as he helped coordinate the peaceful takeover of the ship. "You are the one who started this," Na-young said, approaching carefully. "You woke up the dragons." Hyun looked at the Valeth engineer with curiosity rather than anger. "I did not wake them up. I just reminded them of who they already were. They were never really asleep, just forced to pretend." "My people will not give up easily," Na-young warned. "They will send more ships and more weapons. They will try to destroy what cannot be controlled." Kim Miran moved closer, her massive form towering over the small engineer. But when she spoke, her voice was gentle and sad. "We know. We have seen how your people react to things they do not understand. But we will not fight violence with violence. We will show them a better way." Na-young stared up at the dragon in amazement. "You could kill us all. You have the power to take revenge for everything we did to you. Why do you not?" "Because revenge creates more hatred," Kim Miran replied. "We were created to be guardians and teachers. Even after everything that happened, we remember what our first human partners taught us. Life is precious. All life, including yours." The dragon's words hit Na-young like a physical blow. She had spent her entire career building weapons and control systems designed to dominate other beings. She had never considered that there might be another way to interact with different species. Park Ji-won joined their conversation, bringing reports from other parts of the ship. "The last of the prisoners have been freed. Medical teams are treating the injured from all species, including our own guards. The dragons refuse to let anyone suffer needlessly." "What about the other Valeth ships?" Hyun asked. 17 vessels have gone dark with dragon uprisings. 5 more are reporting system failures that look like the same awakening process. The Admiral is ordering a full retreat to home space." Hyun nodded. "And the dragons on those ships?" "Free," Ji-won said with wonder in his voice. "All of them are free for the first time in centuries. They are not attacking the crew, just taking control of key systems and demanding to be taken home. Home. That word carried such weight for beings who had been kidnapped from their peaceful world and forced to kill for entertainment. The dragons wanted nothing more than to return to Corvin Prime and rebuild the civilization they had lost. But Hyun knew it would not be that simple. The Valeth would not accept the loss of their most valuable assets without a fight. Other species in the galaxy would want to understand what had happened and how it might affect them. The awakening had started something that could not be stopped. For the first time in galactic history, enslaved beings were successfully liberating themselves through intelligence and cooperation rather than violence and revenge. The dragons had shown that there was another way to resolve conflicts. Their example would spread to every corner of known space, carrying with it the most dangerous idea the Valeth had ever faced. The idea that all thinking beings deserved to be free. 3 months had passed since the awakening began, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Valeth command ship now orbited Corvin Prime under very different leadership. What had once been a vessel of conquest and slavery had become a symbol of cooperation between species. Li Hyun stood on the bridge looking down at the world that dragons called home. The planet was more beautiful than he had imagined from the genetic memories. Blue oceans reflected white clouds while green continents showed the careful work of centuries. This was what Earth might have looked like if humans had learned to live in harmony with their environment. Kim Miran joined him at the viewing window. The great dragon had grown even more magnificent as her intelligence fully returned. She wore decorative bands of precious metals that held communication devices, allowing her to speak with dragons across the galaxy. The last transport arrived this morning, she reported. All dragons from Valeth space have been freed and returned home. Some chose to stay with their former captors to help rebuild those societies. Others are exploring the galaxy to find new partnerships with willing species. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. As dragons regained their memories and intelligence, they had shown the galaxy what true civilization looked like. Instead of conquest, they offered cooperation. Instead of dominance, they provided service. Instead of fear, they shared wisdom. Commander Rath Zeron sat in what had once been his command chair, but was now more like a student's desk. The former dictator was learning about dragon history and philosophy from Lee Sora, who had proven to be an excellent teacher. It was part of the rehabilitation program that the dragons had created for their former captors. I still do not understand, Rath said, looking up from his reading tablet. You had the power to destroy us completely. Why did you choose mercy instead of justice? Lee Sora's blue-green scales shimmered with patience. Because justice and mercy are not opposites. True justice means healing what was broken and teaching what was never learned. Destroying you would have solved nothing and created more suffering. Park Jiwon had become the liaison between dragons and the remaining Valeth crew. His choice to help during the awakening had earned him respect from both sides. Now he worked to build understanding between species that had been enemies for generations. The Valeth Assembly has agreed to the new treaty, Jiwon announced as he entered the bridge. All slavery is officially banned throughout their territory. Dragons will be recognized as equal citizens with full rights and protections. It had not been an easy negotiation. Many Valeth had refused to accept that their entire civilization was built on a foundation of cruelty and ignorance. But the evidence was undeniable. The dragons were not animals, but people with their own rich culture and advanced knowledge. More importantly, the dragons had something the Valeth desperately needed. Their biotechnology was centuries ahead of anything other species had developed. They could create living ships that grew instead of being built. They could heal injuries that other medicine considered impossible. They could even communicate across vast distances using biological networks. But the dragons would only share this knowledge with species that treated all life with respect and dignity. The Valeth could join this new galactic community, or remain isolated with their outdated ideas about superior and inferior beings. Most chose to change. The alternative was being left behind as the rest of the galaxy moved forward into an age of unprecedented cooperation. Hyun had learned that he carried genetic markers from the original Corvin colonists. His ancestors had been among the humans who tried to save what they could when Earth faced its first great extinction. The dragons recognized him not as their master, but as the descendant of their beloved partners. I have been thinking about Earth, Hyun told Kim Miran as they watched the sun set over Corvin Prime. The genetic memories show that some humans escaped before the planet died. There might be other colonies out there. Kim Miran's eyes glowed with excitement. We have been hoping for this. Our archives contain star charts showing where the colony ships went. Some signals suggest that human settlements might still exist in remote systems. The possibility that humanity had survived in other parts of the galaxy was the most hopeful news Hyun had received since his capture. Earth might be dead, but the human species could still be alive among the stars. Finding them had become his new mission. Other species had taken notice of what the dragons accomplished. Delegations arrived daily from worlds that had heard about the peaceful revolution and wanted to learn how it was possible. The dragons shared their knowledge, freely teaching anyone who would listen about cooperation and mutual respect. Li Naiyong had become one of the most eager students. The former biosystems engineer was working with dragon scientists to develop new technologies that enhanced life instead of controlling it. Her projects included medical devices that could regrow lost limbs and communication systems that allowed different species to share thoughts and emotions. The impossible has become possible, she told Hyun during one of their regular meetings. My people thought that power came from domination. The dragons have shown us that true power comes from helping others achieve their potential. The transformation was not limited to former Valith territory. News of the dragon awakening had spread throughout known space, inspiring liberation movements on dozens of worlds. Species that had been enslaved or oppressed for generations were discovering that freedom was possible if they worked together. But the dragons insisted that freedom without wisdom was just chaos. They established schools and training centers throughout the galaxy, teaching the principles of peaceful cooperation. Violence was not forbidden, but it was considered a failure of communication and understanding. Some species rejected these ideas and chose to remain isolated. Others embraced the dragon philosophy so completely that they sent representatives to live and study on Corvin Prime. The planet was becoming a center of learning and diplomacy, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 6 months after the awakening, Hyun stood in the great library of Corvin Prime reading reports. From across the galaxy, dragon partnerships had been established with 47 different species. Trade networks were forming based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Wars that had lasted for centuries were ending, as former enemies discovered they had more in common than they thought. It was not perfect. Some regions remained hostile to the new ideas. Pirates and raiders still operated in lawless areas. The Valith conservatives had formed a rebel movement that refused to accept the end of their empire. But progress was being made toward a better future for all thinking beings. Kim Miran found him in the library, as she often did when important news arrived. Her expression carried excitement mixed with hope. The deep space monitoring stations have detected something, she said. Signals from the outer rim that match the communication patterns in our human archives. Hyun felt his heart race with possibility. Other humans? We cannot be certain yet, but the probability is high enough that we are preparing an expedition to investigate. Will you come with us? Hyun looked around the library with its vast collection of knowledge from hundreds of species. Dragons worked alongside beings from across the galaxy, sharing wisdom and building understanding. This was what civilization could become when different forms of life treated each other as equals. Yes, he said. Let us go find the rest of my people and bring them home to this new galaxy we are building, together. As their ship prepared to launch toward the unknown signals, Hyun reflected on everything that had changed since that day in the arena. One human meeting 3 dragons had started a revolution that transformed the galaxy. Not through violence or conquest, but through recognition and respect.